Okay, recording is started.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. It appears that all five board directors are present. Good evening and welcome to this evening's meeting of the Woodbury County Board of Adjustment. Today's date is March 3rd and the time is 5 o'clock. Tonight's meeting will be audio taped and the minutes will be prepared. In respect to all parties, I ask those present turn off cell phones or set to vibrate. Those in attendance are asked to legibly complete the attendance sheet up on the front table. I'd like to take a moment to review the procedures that the board will follow tonight. First, the board will handle the normal housekeeping agenda items. Then for each application on the agenda, I will open the public hearing on the item. The planning and zoning staff will then present the staff report, including the staff recommendation. Any letters or other communication received from the public prior to the hearing will be entered into the record. The applicant will then have the opportunity to present his or her case and respond to the staff report. Next, we will hear comments from the public. If you'd like to speak either in support of or against the application, you must come to the microphone. Please state your name and address for the record. All interested parties shall be heard, but repetitious comments should be avoided. Repetitious or irrelevant comments may be ruled out of order by the chair. I ask that you remain respectful and courteous with your comments at all times. After all public comments have been heard, the staff and applicant may make a closing statement. The hearing shall then be closed by motion and vote. Thereafter, no further comments from the staff, public, or applicant may be heard unless asked for by the board. The board shall then deliberate the case and may ask questions of the applicant, the staff, or any party offering testimony. However, such questions do not reopen the hearing for additional comments from the public unless so requested or approved by the board. The board will then formulate and vote on a motion. The motion will either typically grant or deny the requested application. Any board member who has an ex parte communication to place in the record of this meeting should do so prior to the beginning of deliberation of the respective agenda item. Any person desiring to appeal the board's decision to a court of record may do so within 30 days after the filing of this decision with the Planning and Zoning Office. Okay, do we have any public comment on matters not on the agenda? Anybody on the phone, Dan, for anything not on the agenda?
Just as far as the agenda, we do have Steve Curtis with us and on the phone, of course, or through the Teams.
Okay.
And otherwise, also, if you let the record reflect, all five board members are present, that you mentioned. I think you mentioned.
I did. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. At the opening. So we're good
And
there.
roll call. Yeah. we're
Okay.
good.
All right. Okay. I will move down to item 4. I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes from the previous meeting.
I so move.
We have a motion by Pam to approve the minutes of the previous meeting. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Second by Doyle. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Yeah, that motion carries 5-0. Okay, I'll move down to item 5. This is the approval and adoption of the rules of procedure for the Woodbury County Board of Adjustment.
Okay.
On one housekeeping item, Dan, do I need to open the public hearing for this?
No,
or
no,
not? Okay.
there are no public hearings tonight. It's basically actions and information.
Okay.
And just for the record, at the meeting on February 11th, the Woodbury County Board of Supervisors did receive the proposed rules of procedure in terms of adjusting the time of this meeting for the Board of Adjustment to 5 o'clock p.m., as well as solidifying the meeting of it in this location in the basement of the courthouse. The Board of Supervisors formally took action to adopt them in their eyes for their perspective for you to meet. And so the requirements are that we bring them back to you for you to basically motion and second and approve them so that we could solidify them. Once the Board of Adjustment makes the motion, the chair will be asked to sign them, then they will go on record in the auditor's office as far as being the official document for this respective meeting. So if everything looks good to you, and I will just pull up on your screen here, the area that was targeted. You'll see this section 2 now reflects, it's the first Monday of every month beginning at 5 o'clock p.m. in the Board of Supervisors meeting room in the basement at the Woodbury County Courthouse. So that was really the only change. So your, this would empower, a motion of power would authorize Chairperson Daniel Hare to sign this, if there is a motion in a second.
I would move to accept this change.
Okay, Pam has made a motion to accept the adoption to our rules. Do I have a second?
Also,
We have a second by Tom. there any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. Okay, that motion carries 5-0.
Okay, and now for the signing ceremony.
I gotta do it on the spot, huh?
Yeah, this time. We'll use the blue
All
here.
right. It's right here then. Dan?
Right there, and if
Okay.
you'll date it today.
Okay, right here. So this is 3-3 today, isn't it?
I'll attest it.
All right.
I'll ask you to sign multiple copies.
Mhm.
Okay, yeah, I'll take those sheets too.
Oh, okay.
And just do the same thing with that one. I put the bottom one on top.
All right.
I'll need that pin back from you. We want it to match.
Yep. Good thinking.
Do a third as a backup.
All right. There it is. It's official.
Okay. Good news. Are we gonna hand off pins?
I should have signed with about 3 different ones. I don't think my signature is quite that famous, unfortunately.
Okay, well, if you want to move to the next agenda item, well, it would be nuclear.
Okay, so I will move down to the next agenda item, which is the update on the nuclear energy facilities discussion. This is an information item, and I believe we have a guest speaker to address the board. Is that correct, Dan?
Yes, we do have Steve Curtis on the line here, and just very briefly, I just want to mention that, of course, the zoning commission is engaged in looking at nuclear energy. I've discussed a bit kind of with the county attorney's office as far as how we handle that. In the past, I've had the interpretation that we have electrical energy generation, not including wind in the ordinance, which could support the idea of nuclear energy in the industrial area. It enumerates in the industrial area and prohibits in our other zoning districts, including the agricultural being prohibited. We do have some other language in there about chemical materials as far as being eligible for conditional uses in the general industrial area. So I tied those two concepts together to see us and generally having a path that we could likely permit that. And after kind of engaging the county attorney's office further on it, the recommendation is to enumerate or speak specifically to nuclear. So that's something we're going to work through and discuss and bring forward in the zoning commission. So we'll anticipate having another public hearing this month as far as looking at those details. Steve, who is on the phone with us tonight, gave the zoning commission a very nice presentation last week. And I know Steve knows how zoning works quite a bit. The planning and zoning commissions typically deal with the planning aspects or us having different policies in place to serve the public health, safety, and welfare of the citizens of Woodbury County. The Board of Adjustment acts more as a quasi judicial body where applications are brought to the Board of Adjustment to evaluate whether an opportunity for a permit could be evaluated and whether it would fit or not fit within a particular zoning district. And so kind of with that said, it's imperative with nuclear going on and being discussed in the county that all the stakeholders who have positions of responsibility have an understanding of what's going on with this respective issue. So it's very important to brief the Board of Adjustment on these various aspects. And I know Steve gives a really good presentation as far as the spent nuclear material and the potential that is out there. And so I would ask Steve if you would give us a brief background of yourself and tell us a bit about your thoughts on the entire industry, where we could go as really a country as well as a community, as far as these forms of new technology. And I would just kind of say to the Board of Adjustment members, you would probably not likely be directly voting in on a policy per se, but I think it's very important to continue to think about the topic of nuclear and kind of look into it as far as what your thoughts are, as far as the permitting and the general understanding of how it can fit within land use as far as the county. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of cut my comment short, and I'm going to defer over to Steve and ask him to give us an overview of your thoughts on the nuclear industry and its potential. So Steve, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dan. I do appreciate this, and I appreciate all of you for being here. And the basis tonight is to give you some little information, but I would really like to answer your questions. That's where I really am able to communicate things that you really care about. By way of background, I have a master's degree in health physics, which is how radiation affects people. I lived in Las Vegas for 38 years. About 15 of that, I worked for the Department of Energy in Nevada, the operations office. And I was involved with the tail end of the nuclear testing program there that ended in 1992. And after that, I went into what they call nuclear emergency response, which is the nuclear emergency search team and the consequence management team, which dealt with radiological things throughout the country. And I was a technical team leader that would lead a team of national lab scientists to go out and figure out what was happening if there was a spill, or if we had to search for a point source for a counterterrorism aspect or something like that, or some request from a jurisdiction. And we never, the whole time I was there, we never did one that was an actual, well, okay, kind of a few, but nothing major. And we were involved mostly in exercises, which is quite fortunate. But our job was to work with many different local jurisdictions and military outfits and things like that if they had any issues with radiological problems. And that was a lot of fun. I did that for about 15 years. And then I before that, I was in the Army for 4 years. I was in the National Guard for 7 years. Since the time I left DOE, I did a bunch of developmental work with the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and a research institute that's affiliated with them. And then I basically just moved out of Las Vegas and moved out to beautiful Minnesota, where I live today. And so I'm doing this all sort of as my own initiative. There's about 3 or 4 of us around the country that are trying to talk and develop relationships with certain people in local jurisdictions and try to explain all this. So the story about nuclear, and you can't pick up a paper today without hearing something about nuclear power. That wasn't true even a year ago. The demand and the understanding, not the understanding so much, but the interest in nuclear power has really raised even in the last 6 months. And like I said, the story about people trying to figure out ways to integrate nuclear power is coming on strong. My perspective on this is that I would like people to understand some of the nuances of what we call slightly used nuclear fuel, but what a lot of people call nuclear waste, and understand how that really is an asset and something we really need to embrace because of all the energy that's in it. So let me give a little description of what we do with nuclear fuel. We have reactors called light water reactors. You have 2 of them in Iowa, and they work on the premise that light water, which is just water, normal water, will slow down neutrons and allow them to fission in uranium that's of a certain isotope. This isotope is uranium-235. Nature's been kind of cruel to us in that the uranium comes out of the ground of 99.3% uranium-238, which does not fission. It does not fission naturally, or does not fission with a single neutron, and 0.7% uranium-235. So to get it to working in a reactor, we need to enrich it in the isotope of 235, which they have done for ages now. by use of centrifuges. They kind of turn it into a gas called uranium hexafluoride, heat it up, pressurize it a little bit, spin it. Heavy stuff goes to the outside, light stuff comes to the inside. Do that about 1,000 times. You can get it enriched to about 3-4%. They move that back into an oxide form, press it into ceramic little pellets that they stuff in long tubes and put in nuclear power assemblies. They're usually about 12 to 15 feet tall, and they're weigh about a half a ton. And that's the commodity of nuclear fuel. And when you're standing right, you can stand all you want to next to a new fuel assembly, and there's absolutely no radiological problem with it. It's after you take it out of the reactor that it becomes very, very radiologically dangerous. So the fuel goes into the reactor about 3 to 5 years, and they do some tricks with moving around different places. But after about 3 to 5 years, you end up with the uranium-235 that was 3 or 4% enriched is all the way down to 1% enriched because it fissions. Now, just for your edification, and this is why nuclear power is so important as an energy source, one fission of a uranium atom releases 50 million times more energy than one oxidation of a coal atom. So burn one coal molecule, and one uranium atom fission gives you 50 million times more energy. So it's a very compact, handy source of energy to have. I'm sure you guys probably all know that, but a lot of people don't know how pronounced that is. After the time it goes into reactor, like I said, about 3% of the uranium turns into something called fission products, which are the very dangerous, highly radioactive remnants of when it splits. It forms two different atoms, and they're not the same every time, but they're a mix of things called fission products. Some have short half-lives, some have long half-lives. Most of them have very, very short half-lives, so they decay very quickly away. That is the energy we use to heat water and produce electricity. When it comes out of there, like I said, it's 3% of the fission products. 1% of it is the uranium-235 that's not fissioned yet. And another 1% of it is something called minor actinides, which most of those mostly consist of plutonium isotopes, which are also fissile. And the rest of it is U-238. So 95% of the entire fuel structure never even changes the whole time that it's in the reactor. At that point, you take it out, you put it into a water pool. And of course, you do this all remotely, and it's all shielded because of the high radiation content of the fuel after it's been used. Put that in about 30 feet of water and circulate the water. The water cools down. It's physically hot. It's radiologically hot. The water will shield all the radiation, and the water will cool it down. So after about 3 to 4 years sitting inside the cooling pond, it becomes it decays far enough away that it can now be air cooled. And this was the point that the government was supposed to have taken the fuel from the reactor company and put it into a repository, but I think we all know the story there. That hasn't happened, and still hasn't happened 45 years later. So this gives an opportunity to Iowa, which I'll describe in a minute. So they put that into a dry cask storage. They put maybe 10 to 15 of these. The designs are different for different reactors. They're all concrete, reinforced concrete. Some of them, they just sit them on top of a concrete pad. Some of them put into holes, what they call a sarcophagus. But there they sit, and they can air cool for essentially forever. And they do decay very, very quickly, but they're still pretty highly radioactive for maybe 100 years. Again, in a decaying posture. So that's where they sit today. And my concept is that we should probably use that for energy, because there exists a technology called fast reactors. And in fast reactors, we don't slow the neutron down to the thermal levels that we do in light water reactors. They stay faster, they stay more energetic. And there's a whole different physics way that they operate in the physics realm if they're fast versus if they're slow. So when they're fast, they can activate the uranium-238 that's not being used now, turn it into plutonium-239 and fission it. So in this case, you can take the 95% of the U-238 that hasn't been used you can turn it into fuel and you can fission it. So essentially you get about 30 times the power out of a spent fuel rod than you did when it was a new fuel rod in a light water reactor. I just think that's too much of an advantage to pass up. So my purpose here is to try to increase your understanding of how this may work in your state. Since you have two nuclear reactors in your state, you have spent fuel sitting on your in your state now, sitting on those reactor sites. They're very safe. There's no issue with them. I will point out that you probably heard of the Nuclear Navy. They have over 100 reactors. There's 94 active reactors in the commercial fleet in the U.S. Provides about 20% of the power for the entire U.S. But the entire Navy, aircraft carriers and submarines are all powered. So a lot of the surface ships are now powered by nuclear power as well. And so they have a reactor that's able to last for 30 years without being refueled. And so their design is slightly different than what we can use for commercial reactors. And so you put a reactor in a sub, run it for 30 years. If you're down under the water, you can make fresh water, you can make fresh air, you can stuff it full of food that you'd probably rather have fresh food anyway. So they can stay down a long time in a submarine, in an aircraft carrier. They can power the entire ship of 5,000 people, supports 5,000 people with a reactor that lasts about 30 years. So that's a tremendous advantage for military. It's quiet. Every other country would rather have nuclear reactor technology, and right now Russia and China are the ones that have it, our adversaries, and we do. And there's other ones that are trying to develop it, so eventually that'll become the norm. But we've had it since 1955. Now, when you decommission a submarine, you take the reactor out, put it on a transport, either a train, it's usually a train, and you ship it out to Idaho and put it in a ditch. So these reactors are all sitting in a ditch in Idaho. Absolutely no problem in the last 40 years with this whole process. It's worked out splendidly well. There's been no release of radiation or anything because of it. So there are some misconceptions out there that nuclear power is not safe. There's misconceptions that is expensive. And there's a lot of, well, like any news story, you can report whatever aspect of the news you choose. And if you choose to report the stuff that sounds really bad, that's what people internalize. And that's kind of what's happened with nuclear power. So my idea for Iowa, and I've tried to petition the federal government for many years to try to change this. It's like almost impossible to even get an audience with them. So my attempt is to approach a state, and I do that by education. If a state would decide that they could want to accept this material, then they would get all the benefits of the 30 times energy that exists in this. They could basically run the clean energy scene for the next century if they wanted to do this. And if they did, it would take a governor making a declaration. It would take there exists in Congress what they call a Congressional Nuclear Waste Fund that they've collected for ratepayers. Some in Iowa. Everybody who had a nuclear power reactor in their grid got charged this fee from 1983 to 2014. They collected all the money. They used some of it to study the rock in Yucca Mountain to see if it was suitable, but that program completely was stopped. It's still the law that the spent fuels going to Nevada, but the funding has been completely stopped since the Obama era, and they haven't gone any farther than that. So there's the spent fuel sits on the pads, the $50 billion now. It gains interest every year because, of course, it's in T-bills, and it sits there. It can be used for no other purpose than that. So my concept is for about 25 to 30 billion of that, you could transition fast reactor technology into the private sector. And you could use this fuel to make power, and it's kind of a no-brainer to me, but a lot of people need to understand it, I guess, a little bit better. You can basically, there's lots of different salts. Some want to use chlorine salts, some want to use fluorine salts. There's maybe 8 or 10 companies out there with technology that can do this. You might have heard of thorium reactors. The technology is exactly the same as a thorium reactor. So any thorium reactor company, either a sodium cooled fast reactor or a molten salt cooled fast reactor, could do this. The one I like is what we call liquid fuel. There's other solid fuel concepts as well. And you basically take the material the way it is, turn it from an oxide, you gotta shave it all up, turn it from an oxide to a chlorine. And once you get the original reactor started, it has to get started with fissile material, which could be plutonium from the weapons program, it could be plutonium from reactor fuel, it could be actinides. It could be any number of fissile material, even high assay low enriched uranium would work. That's a new kind of fuel they're trying to develop. But once you get it going, then you can shave this chlorinated fuel and dump it into the reactor and basically create as much energy as you want. Your only restriction is how much heat transfer systems you have connected to it. So basically, the technology is ready. There's companies out there that can do it. The Argonne National Laboratory has ran an experiment for 30 years. They used a sodium fast-cooled reactor and they used solid fuel. So that's just a different design, but they ran for 30 years without a single problem. And one of the best things about it is if you have a problem with it and you lose power, you lose offsite power, use pump goes down or whatever, in a solid fuel, it will expand, and as it expands, the reactivity goes down, so the heat goes down. And it will actually shut itself off without any human intervention. And of course, with liquid fuel, the liquid and the fuel are all together in the same reactor. So if you have an issue with that, you can dump it. You can dump the liquid into containers that are basically long, skinny cylinders that can't go to a criticality. Criticality is when you have fissions, and it can't go to a critical state. So it's essentially what we call intrinsically safe. It can take care of itself in any kind of situation. So a lot of the issues that people have with regular light water reactors, which I will tell you, the light water reactor has the best industrial safety record as an industry by orders of magnitude of any other industry in the United States. In fact, I'll make this statement, and you can ask me questions about it. In the history of nuclear power in the whole world, there's never been anybody hurt from the normal operation of commercial nuclear reactors. There's never been anybody harmed. Now we can talk about Chernobyl, which wasn't a reactor that was running in normal conditions. I'll answer any questions about that, but nobody was hurt at 3 Mile Island and nobody was hurt at Fukushima. There have been other accidents in research reactors that have hurt people in the early days, and those were research reactor sorts of instances, but never in the commercial world. We've produced thousands of reactor years of electricity. So I'll leave you with one more thought. The electricity contained, the potential electricity contained in just the spent fuel we have on the pads now, that's about 90,000 metric tons, could power the current requirement of the United States for 270 years, all by itself, once these reactors get proliferated. Now, if you can start considering this and thinking about it, we're talking about something that might happen for a while down the road. But if we'd have started this 20 years ago, we'd have had a solution to our energy problem right now. And yet they've chased other tails down the road that haven't really produced what we need. I think this is the way to go. And if you decide to consent to accept, you probably would. I would put a provision on that you would do anything with anybody else's until you took care of Iowa's spent fuel. And there's about 500 years worth of all Iowa power sitting on your cooling pads just in the 2 reactors you have in Iowa. So that would be a long time. And probably what will happen, even if you say you consent to accept it, that it would be probably eventually they would put these reactors on the sites where the fuel is now. It would make more sense to do that and create power where there's already a transmission system there, where the nuclear power reactor is aging out anyway, and you could integrate the new reactor into the follow-on power production form. It's uniquely suited for data centers because they're going to want their own power source. I mean, you've probably heard about that. They specifically want nuclear, and they specifically want their own power source. They don't want to mess with the grid. And when you're getting a gigawatt of power, you can make a relatively large amount of power with a nuclear reactor in a small space. So when you're considering data centers, that's probably the way they're going to want to go. And There are two concepts now for interim storage sites in Texas and New Mexico. And despite the Texas declaring that they are all in for small modular reactors and next generations, they want to build new reactors. They are fighting in court to keep the spent fuel out of Texas, and so is New Mexico. So they have that approved by the NRC. They can move it into these interim storage sites. It'd probably be decades before they ever were able to move it all. But if it's in your state, then you get to control the fate of it. You basically get to control the aspect of it. It's like I said, at 10 cents a kilowatt hour, there's about $100 trillion worth of energy embedded in these spent fuel rods. So you can make a lot of mistakes and still, that's a lot of money. Our market in the country for it's about $500 billion a year for electricity. That's a rather robust, large business. That's just electricity. That's not all power. You get about 1.2 trillion if you count all energy sources that we use. So it's a big, robust market that nobody is looking to grab, that a state could really jump into the mix and be the next clean energy center for the world, probably, if they wanted to do it. And they could leverage that $50 billion nuclear waste fund. Like I said, I don't think we need more than about 25 or 30 billion to entice private companies to come in and take over the business. I'll leave it right there for now because I know I'm past 5:30, but I'll entertain anybody's questions if they have them, and I'm happy to come back. I'm happy to answer questions either by email or by phone or any other forum you want. So Dan, that's about it.
I guess I'd open up with a question here, Stephen. So when you fission those spent fuel rods and they're at the end of their life, then what happens to those? Are those, when they're done, after fissioning the spent fuel, do they have to go through that same cooling process for 100 years, or is that a whole different process then once they're used up a second time?
Okay, one of the big problems with the current fuel is that by law, by a court case they lost, they have to sequester these things for 1 million years, which is pretty ridiculous. But the fission products really only stay. In fact, after 30 years, all the fission products go back down to the level of mined uranium in 300 years. But by 100 years, they're way down, probably 80% of the radioactivity has been decayed away. But what's a lot of the, remember how they said they split into atoms? They split into different kinds of atoms. Now, there's a pretty consistent pattern for how they do that. Not every atom splits the same way, but when you split lots of it, you can get a very consistent pattern of what isotopes you get. And many of the atoms are rare earth metals and platinum group metals like rhodium, ruthenium. Things that are very valuable and very, very in demand. Now, when you have 3% fission products, that's probably not much to mine. But when 100% of them turn into fission products, you got to wait about 50 or 60 years to let them decay away and become cool. But and you just have to put them into concrete shielding. Basically, you don't need a deep geological repository because it's 100 years is enough to get it down to a manageable level. And you just let them decay away, and then you've got an opportunity to mine these chemicals for some very valuable materials later on. So even though it's radioactive and it needs to be handled carefully, we know how to do that, and we know how all that works. And then if you think of something maybe 50 years from now, think of 50 years ago, our technology is going to progress 50 years from now to a place where this may be a trivial problem from some technology we don't even know, but that's available. So yes, you have to sequester them and shield them for about 300 years. Technically, I'd say 100 years because they're very manageable by then. But that's easily done, and it's something that we've been doing for ages and know how to do.
Thank you, Steve. What would if we had a repository, what would it look like?
Well, the concepts for the interim storage facilities, and there's 2 of them, and between the 2 of them, they're supposed to be able to accept all the existing spent fuel, 90,000 metric tons on 2 of them. And each of them comprise about 32 acres each. And they're not deep repositories because they're supposed to be interim storage facilities. They're going to be stored on the ground. So they basically be a replica of what you see on the site of each reactor site, only combined in a place that's more compact and centralized. So they have to ship all these containers to a centralized site. They put them in the same kind of sarcophaguses that they're in now and protected. And then they'll be allowed to air cool where they would be in one central location. But the concept has two sites, 32 acres each, could contain it all in a very safe and retrievable configuration. And the design's already approved by the NRC, and the design is already companies ready to put it in, but they're fighting in court, Texas. And in fact, now the court case opens, I think tomorrow or the next day, that they're fighting the NRC to say that you can't shove it down their throats. And indeed, they won't be able to, because Nevada showed them that a state can stand up to them if they don't want them to. They won't be able to do it. But they didn't listen to that lesson. However, a state decided they saw an advantage in it. You could make all kinds of concessions and deals that you wanted to. Because like I said, for about 30 billion, you could transition this whole thing over to private enterprise, start building these reactors. And if they're going to build them, they're going to build them in Iowa, if that's where the stuff is. So you can see, I can see an industrial park. There's a concept called a Tech Transfer National Lab, which means that you would want to move all the research we pay for in the national labs out to industry as quickly as you can, which doesn't really happen right now. But that kind of a lab could be asked for. You could do, military is going all in for what they call microreactors. The big ones we have are 1,000 megawatts. The military wants about 10 to 15 megawatts for each one of their bases. They're already in the final stages to do it, and they're going to have their microreactors. And nobody has a solution for the spent fuel from small modular reactors either. They won't even talk about that. So you could provide that solution for them as well, and provide a great service for that side of it. But the bottom line is you got to open up. If you solve the problem of spent fuel, and you solve the problem of licensing, which is a real issue with the NRC, they won't license anything, then it opens up the entire nuclear power next generation reactor concept. Even large reactors are fine, they work fine. But that opens up that entire industry to start really preparing the extra energy you need, or the electricity you need for, we're ramping up with data centers and everything. They're saying, data centers say they're going to need 300 gigawatts of power just for their data centers. So that's a market that's going to be huge. They basically don't care what they pay for it. They'll pay 50, 60 cents a kilowatt hour if they want, if they have to get their power. So you're going to find a lot of competition with residential and commercial now. And if you stay ahead of that power increasing curve, and now if you use spent fuel, it's 100% clean because it's already mined and refined. It just has to be fissioned. So you just change the chemical composition, dump it in, and you can make power out of it and fission. So those are some real advantages of going this way. But to me, it's a no-brainer. I just think it's a matter of people understanding and asking questions on it. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, you did.
Okay.
So, if 32 acres would hold half of it, is
Right.
there an additional buffer area around that 32 acres?
I think the buffer area is included in 32 acres. They've only asked us to sequester 32 acres for each site.
Okay.
So that includes the buffer, and there's really nothing to really buffer. I mean, there is a reactor called Connecticut Yankee that was decommissioned in 1999. And all of its fuel sits on a concrete pad, 222 feet by about 80 feet, with a chain link fence and some barbed wire around it. The entire reactor's inventory for all, I think, 30 years it ran, was sitting on that pad. So there's not much of a space requirement to keep this stuff.
So I just got a random question that just popped in my mind. I mean, maybe it's way out there, but say we start building these reactors. I mean, do you see them as being a possible terrorist target down the line? I mean, is there a fear of somebody crashing a plane into those and causing a problem, or are they designed in such a way so that's not an issue, or what are your thoughts on that?
They'll be robust, of course. They'll be in containment buildings that are pretty robust. And I will say this, that they did steal airplanes one time. And they could have crashed them into a reactor, but they decided to crash them into other buildings. They chose a different route than a reactor. They were within range of the reactor at Calvert Cliffs, right over there near DC, and they chose not to do it. Now, the reactors are built with outer and inner containment that are extremely robust, and they can stand an airplane crash into it. But I'm having a hard time. People talk about terrorist events all the time. Having a hard time working into my mind what kind of terrorist event could possibly be worth it to a perpetrator. It's deadly. It's deadly, instantly deadly if you open up the canisters. It's in a form that can't be distributed, so you'd have to somehow find a way to make it into a form that would be easily distributed if you want to worry people. And if you did distribute it, the more it distributes, the less of a danger it is. And terrorists want to do things that are quick and dirty and something within their realm of possibility. It's just such a huge undertaking to try to go about this, and the success rate will probably be nil. So I imagine it could be possible, but I don't think the effort they go through to do it would be something that they would focus on, because there's so many other easier targets to do. So the answer is, like everything else, nothing's impossible. But these are very well protected reactors, and they're very well built facilities. And if a guy's got an airplane, which I can't imagine terrorists ever getting a hold of an airplane again, they already decided to crash it into something else. So the answer is, I wish somebody could come up with a terrorist scenario that I could wrap my mind around, but I can't. I can't think of why terrorists would be remotely interested in going after this stuff.
Okay, yep, thanks for that. That's
Yeah.
just point of clarification I was curious about, so I think you
Yeah.
answered that good.
Okay. And I know people have a lot of the questions about safety and what they've heard from whatever sources they've tapped into. And like I said, happy to answer questions now, answer questions later. The main goal that I would like to do is eventually someday brief a governor, at least brief one, give them the possibility, because I don't think the federal government will ever do anything about it. And I think the state could petition the federal government and really develop an industry, but it would have to be a privately run industry. So our concept is to have a privately invested, capitalized company that works in concert with the state. We talked about that last time. The state can do all the political, machinations, and the privately run company can do all the business applications that it takes. But all the reactor companies are there. They all want to move this forward. They can't get licenses from the NRC. Although I'll tell you, there's probably 50 or 60 small business operations that are 100% completely capitalized by private individuals that don't have a chance of a profit in at least 10 years because of the way the system is designed. And they're still private investors, and they're still working. They're just trying to get their designs licensed and able to be built. There is one reactor design that is small modular reactor that is approved to go in, and they're kind of working overseas. They tried to put one up in Utah, but again, I think the politics got in their way, and they finally pushed the price up so high they didn't think they could afford it. But they're going overseas now. There's a lot of interest overseas to buy these reactors and make them work. So as this industry develops, but I'll tell you right now, nobody is looking at this concept. Nobody, other state wants to consent to accept. And like I said, Texas and New Mexico are fighting this tooth and nail to keep this stuff out of their state, when I would beg for it. So I know, but that's the goal, is to get to a governor that could make it, that could consolidate the impetus in the state to do that. If the governor decided that this was a good idea, you couldn't beat the investors away with a stick if that actually happened. So private invested company would be no problem. It's just the understanding and the concept and the political will to do it. And I know we're entering into a new paradigm of political will right now. So maybe there's a chance now, but a lot of states are afraid to go take an initiative to the federal government. They're all waiting for the federal government to tell them something to do. Well, here's a chance for a state to take over. I don't see any other opportunity better out there. And there's no commodity more important to people than electricity. Every other thing you talk about takes a back seat. If people don't have electricity, no other problems will matter to them. So we do have problems with the grids. We do have problems, as you know, with different types of electricity being trying to integrate it on the grid. We have issues that, like I said, data centers want to come in and make their own power systems and don't even use the grid. These things are all changes that are happening, but the business is there to stay forever. 500 billion a year. It's be great to have a piece of that, I think.
May I ask something?
Sure.
Steve, Dan Priestley, the Board of Adjustment, plays a role in evaluating projects that are brought before them. So kind of hypothetically, if a nuclear application was brought here under electrical energy generation, and of course we look at the storage aspects of it, our language here is very much tailored into how it fits within the respective area or the community. And we've got a set of criteria that really are within the scope of public health, welfare, and safety of the community, as well as a consideration of what is necessary and desirable for the community. And I'm not going to ask you for a hypothetical generally on a project, but when a company has to express to the county in conjunction with the other government regulations, whether we're dealing with the feds, the NRC, or the state, what is something that local leaders at the county, how could you convince us, I guess, that a project could generally fit well in an industrial area, coexist, and add to the energy infrastructure? I guess if I'm going into the necessary and desirable, we could generally argue that that we do have a grid that's going to definitely need more power in the future to support industries. And I kind of simplified this to some points of asking folks how many different things they actually have plugged in at their houses now. If you look at the number of charger cords, number of devices that we're totally sucking off the grid. And so I guess I'm trying to put my shoes in the applicant coming to the county to say, okay, we have this site, we think it's away from other people. How can it coexist in this location? What do you think would be kind of some, I guess, aspects to demonstrate to the public that nuclear storage and the actual activity can coexist? I know you talked about the safety numbers, and we know those outlier events. It's amazing sometimes how an outlier is something that speaks very loud and gets into the psyche, and it's not as exciting if the safety rating is 99.2, but then the other
What about the
small
plan? Yeah.
probability.
Yeah.
So we know that's the political side of it, but ultimately, when somebody comes down, let's just say somebody does bring an application through the Zoning Commission Board of Adjustment, we have a series of public hearings, and of course, we welcome all the perspectives, absolutely. But if we have, Chernobyl or whatever brought up, how can, based on the literature, based on the all the information available, how can we assure the public? I know a lot of times when we're at the local level, we defer, oh, it made it through the federal government, or it made it through this level, but yet our government is closest to the people, and our citizens, our neighbors, our folks that live out there and around do have an expectation of going through the process, I guess. How can we have some level of assurance? I mean, things can look good on paper, absolutely. And we can
Yes.
compare things to different instances, but where do we find that special zone to say, okay, I feel confident criteria number 1, 2, and 3 are met. This can exist within the neighborhood, and it can be something, of course, that is necessary and desirable. I know I loaded that with a lot, and I don't expect to answer to go directly into that, but what do
Yeah,
you think
there's-
the sales pitch is to the public if there
There's
isn't?
entire books written on this, but I'll try to consolidate a little bit.
Okay.
My perspective is that with everything else we sell, we look at the history, okay? We look at people's perception of the history, number one. And when we talk about risk, we also talk about benefit. Somehow with nuclear, we don't do that. And so anytime you talk about risk to anybody, you better weigh it against the benefits so people can make a choice. That's the pet peeve of mine. If anybody talks to you about any risk of anything, and they don't talk about a benefit of whatever they're trying to implement in the same breath, you kind of need to be suspicious. So I would say that when you're looking at the aspect of what you want to do, couch it in a different way to people. I mean, we can predict all kinds of things that would be horrible, but I'll take cars, for example. If we went out there and published pictures of car accidents, I mean, 40,000 people a year die in car accidents in the United States. Car companies don't lead with that. And I don't know why, because people's perception is, yeah, but it's not gonna be me, because I've driven for 30 years and it's been fine. And so they understand that concept, but if you wanted to submarine the entire automobile industry, you just pay for a bunch of ads, put a bunch of bloody car wrecks and people bodies everywhere and have it, you could scare people from driving cars. I mean, that's all possible. But it's not ethical to do that. And so I think mostly what's happened with nuclear is they haven't been very ethical about their presentation of nuclear. And the industry itself, technically the nuclear industry doesn't exist. Nuclear power reactors exist in utilities that have coal and natural gas and wind and solar, and a bunch of other power generators in their inventory. So they don't specifically advocate nuclear power. They haven't built a nuclear power. They built 2 nuclear power plants in the last 35 years from scratch. So there's not really a giant backlog of people with inventory waiting to come in and put nuclear power plants in. So there's not that kind of an industry. So there's really no industry. There's no nuclear industry out there that's going to try to defend itself, try to put out the propaganda and the advocate for it. There's the American Nuclear Society. I'm a lifetime member of the Nuclear Society, but they're mostly dealing with DC and dealing with utilities. So they are advocates for nuclear power, but they don't really have an strong industry behind them like coal or natural gas, or even wind and solar has a huge lobbying industry behind them to push forward those perspectives that they want people to have. So you know as well as I do, reality is perspective. You know, your perception of what it is what your reality is. And your perception comes from a perspective that you have. And people, you know the story about the elephant, you get a different perspective. The blind man tried to describe an elephant. That's kind of what's happened. And so if you hear a lot about the ugly risk side of it, you're probably not going to like it. And if you don't hear about the benefit side of it, then you're going to be totally making a wrong decision usually, because you don't have all the information. So I would start with trying to craft an education program as much as you can. Now, like you pointed out, it's hard to get people to, you know, work their way up to come out for an evening of fun and excitement with nuclear power talk. I know that's a real trouble, and it may be a benefit because maybe they're not worried in your county, but in general, if they are worried, then they should come out and get their questions answered. There's nothing easier to defend than the safety of nuclear power. If you look at the history, yeah, you can use Chernobyl, and I'll say a few words about Chernobyl. Chernobyl was a very, very cheaply built reactor, didn't have an intercontainment. In our reactors that we built today, there's a very robust steel boiler, maybe a couple feet thick in steel, where the reactor sits. That's called the intercontainment. So if anything happens, very difficult to have it go outside. Anything that can contain whatever happens inside that reactor. And that's worked to our benefit in a couple situations. But Chernobyl didn't have that. They had basically a graphite moderated reactor with rods put in. It's very, very similar to the one that, Fermi did in 1942 to prove the concept at the University of Chicago. So it was a cheap built reactor, but it had a lot of safety, features built into it. That night that it happened, they purposely defeated every safety feature to run an experiment to see if they could get power out of a reactor that's as it's winding down, and it went unstable on it. And the guys that were in charge of it hadn't the faintest clue what reactor physics was. So we naturally got the explosion and it unloaded everything because there's nothing to stop it. It's just a building built around it. But to give you a perspective, there were 3 other reactors in the Chernobyl, same design, and that Chernobyl, there were 4 reactors at Chernobyl. One of them blew up. 3 of them ran for another anywhere from 8 to 12 years beyond the Chernobyl accident without a single incident because they used the safety back. They didn't defeat the safety process they had on it. So it's hard to call Chernobyl an accident when they purposely put the thing into safety. And it's been, that's a pet peeve of mine. It's been maligned as well. There's an example of a commercial power accident. First of all, it wasn't a commercial design that anybody outside of Russia is using. I think Russia's still using a couple of them today, even, strangely enough. But nobody else is using that design, and every other design has an intercontainment to it. And you've seen in 3 Mile Island and Fukushima where the core was completely contained by the intercontainment. It worked the way it was supposed to. It protected people from any kind of accident that they could imagine. And both of those accidents, well, I mean, the big story in Fukushima was 19,000 people died in a tsunami. And all they wanted to talk about was hydrogen explosions at a nuclear power plant. I mean, that's kind of the bias for the media. And in 3 Mile Island didn't hurt anybody either. But it was the first time they've ever had a reactor accident. Nobody really knew what the implications would be. But the intercontainment and the system sort of protected itself, destroyed the reactor. That's a lot of money for whoever built the reactor, but nobody got hurt. So in my mind, safety is nobody gets hurt. And maybe you can see different statistics, but not more than 50 people died from the exposure at the reactor site. There's lots of studies that say that there really wasn't an implication down afterwards of any more. Everybody's worried about cancer for long-term stuff. We could talk for days on that, but I won't. There's there's studies, credible studies that didn't find any. They found a little bit higher thyroid cancers in children, but their diet was probably deficient in iodine. So that was probably part of it, maybe not all of it. And then but they didn't find any other cancers that they could find a trend in the rest of cancers. And you guys all know that there's other things besides radiation that can cause cancer. So I'll leave it at that. The reactors are very, very safe. It's easy to have a track record that you can show now for almost 7 decades of a reactor safety, if that's what you want to talk about. I mean, if you want to talk the outside possibility and build big danger signs for everybody that can scare them away from it, sure, you can do that too. But if ever, I would tell people, number one, if they ever hear somebody talking about risk without talking about benefit, that's propaganda. That's just useless information, because we all take risks every day. I mean, more people have died walking down the sidewalk than have died from commercial nuclear power over 7 decades. But it's difficult to talk risk to people because you scare them just by talking about it. So how you craft that is to me, is how I do is I talk about the benefits and let them ask me questions about the risk. But the rest of the industry leads with the risk. Well, reactors aren't so bad because of this, and we did. And well, 3 Mile Island wasn't so bad, and Fukushima wasn't so bad. Well, if car dealers, if car sales did that or airlines did that, they wouldn't sell a single ticket. Well, yeah, I know we killed 1,000 people in the last 5 years, but that wasn't so bad because we flew a lot more customers, and we really did a good job on the rest of them. And that's not how you market any of that stuff. We all know it's out there. We know no risk is there, but there's no industry safer than nuclear power, and it's been maligned as far as the popular vernacular that's out there. And that's forever much longer I live. That's what I want to do. I want to try to talk to people about that. Get them to change their minds. So much benefit in nuclear power. If we tried to do fast reactors with 270 years worth of power, and we wanted to burn it up as fast as we could, we'd have to beg people to take more electricity. Please find somewhere to use more electricity. You could almost give it away. You could have $100, $100 a month for all you could use, or $50 a month for all you can use, or you could charge a penny a kilowatt hour retail for it, just to help us get rid of it, because that's a real benefit to the country. I don't know anything that can produce power that quickly and that robustly, especially if you're starting to ramp up the demand for power. The power for the last 20 years has been even. 4 trillion kilowatt hours a year has been sold in the United States every year for the last 20 years. Has gone a little bit up, a little bit down, a little bit up, a little bit down, but it's stayed very steady. Well, that's an easy market to fulfill. Well, if you're going to ramp that thing up by 30-40% in a decade, which is probably going to be more than that when the data centers get rolling, you're going to have an issue that you can't face with the current technology you have. So bottom line, I would tell people if they want to solve their problem, the way I put it, you can either have a penny a kilowatt hour electricity, or you can have $1 a kilowatt hour electricity, because the data centers will pay that. They'll pay $1 a kilowatt hour if they have to get power. That's how valuable these data centers are. They're not going to have to, because they're going to make their own deals, but they would. Now, if you think that's strange, think back about 40 years ago. Maybe some of you can't think that 40 years ago, because you probably might not even be that old. But when I was a kid, I would get in trouble for making a long distance phone call because they cost so much money to make. Nobody thought ever that long distance phone calls would be for all you could call for one low monthly cost, right? Well, guess what? Now they are. All you can call for one low monthly cost. This is possible with electricity. Very possible. And I just think a state that wants to raise their hand and take what amounts to an extremely benign risk. I mean, risk of a meteor hitting the planet is probably more than the risk of anything going wrong with spent fuel. But how you convince people of that is a game you have to play. But I would lead with benefits if I was talking to people, and let them ask about risks. Because, like I said, you never want to lead off with risk talking to people. It's just like talking about ghosts and ghouls and death and destruction and sickness. And nobody wants to hear about any of that. So how you do it is, I think you preach the benefits and then answer questions about the risk. That's the way I do it. And if you're setting up priorities, it's all on the companies that are coming in and putting the reactors. It's all up to them to make it safe and convince you they're safe. But I can tell you that the nuclear power industry today is the safest industry on the planet by order of magnitude at least. And the next generation reactor is even safer than that, because they'll shut themselves down. They won't even have explosions or hydrogen leaks or any kind of meltdown situations. They will cool themselves down to a configuration that's safe. So those sorts of things should bring people comfort, especially if they can have the electricity they need that's clean electricity for very, very cheap money. And I know that's what people want. They want electricity on all the time, and they want it for a very cheap price. If they can get that, then they'll talk about the rest of the stuff, but that's what they really want. And this has the promise for that, and you don't have to spend a single dime of Iowa money to do it. If you leverage that waste fund, there's plenty of money there to do it all. And if you use private enterprise, if you don't try to run it in a government situation, but jumpstart a private industry situation, you can ask for anything you want, because they have no solution for this. And they're not coming up with one. All they want to do is bury it, and no state will take it. And that's been the way it's been for 45 years. There's nothing on the horizon that's going to change it. They're all fighting it. So you have a chance to solve a problem for the United States, have a very good opportunity to get extremely cheap, clean energy for people, not only in Iowa, but the United States and the world. And can you imagine if people in Africa had all a penny a kilowatt hour electricity they needed, how much better their lives would be? I mean, it's nice for us, but for them, it actually brings that they can actually cook on a stove or have running water or have lights in their house. I mean, this is the thing that could bring to people all over the world. And it's all private enterprise, and it's all, everybody makes money off of this. So there's just no better deal on the planet in my mind, but people have to get the perspective, get the perception that it's good. And it's changing. It's changing. People are really starting to like nuclear power more. They're not really coming out and trying to understand it, but they're starting to like it. And I'm telling you, for the first state that seizes on this, there could be easily $5-6 billion in business within 10 years, easily, in their state. And we can show you how to do it, but you have to first embrace the idea, and that's what I tell them. And I'm happy to come out and tell them. That's my favorite thing to do. I love talking to groups. I'd even talk to adversarial groups, people that are blatantly against this. They don't usually want you to come out and talk to them. I've never been able to get in front of a group that's definitely anti. They just want to be anti. They don't want to talk about it. But citizens do. Citizens want to hear it. There's a huge advantage to this. And I think if you got, sounds like Montgomery County is sort of pro-nuclear and ready to listen to the story. That's what I do. And I come out, like I said, I'll come out anytime you want. And you know, if you get enough audiences, I'll come out. I don't want to come out if there's not an audience. A long answer but I kept it under a book size though.
Well, thank you.
You bet.
Yeah, thanks a lot for addressing the board here tonight.
Sure. Yeah. And anytime, I'm willing to come back anytime, as you know, and I'll answer email questions and I'll answer phone questions and everything. So I do appreciate you guys giving me the opportunity.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Does anybody else have any follow-up questions or? Okay, seeing none, I guess, Dan, I'll turn it back over to you then.
Yeah, much appreciated, Steve. I'm sure we'll have lots more questions as we navigate through this. It's definitely an intricate and fascinating topic, quite obviously, and so I appreciate your time and educating us on some of this aspects. So we appreciate it.
You bet. You listened to me for an hour, and I appreciate that. Okay, guys, is that it for tonight then for me?
That'd be it. And
Okay. I appreciate it, and I'll be talking to you guys soon. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Night.
Okay, with that, I'll move down to item 6. Are there any public comments on matters not on the agenda? Seeing how we do not have a full house here tonight, I believe I'll move down to item 7 for the staff update.
Yeah, as far as to repeat kind of what I said at the very beginning, zoning commission's looking at this. We're going to have public hearings. We were encouraged last week by having some more folks in the audience. I do think that, we have a bright county, very bright farmers, property owners across the board. We've noticed the public hearing meetings as far as in the Danbury paper, the Mobile paper, Sergeant Bluff, as well as the Sioux City Journal. I think with the idea that we have electrical energy generation in the industrial area, we know from both the wind debate as well as the solar debate, there's a lot of value on agricultural preservation land. So I'm not trying to assume or imply that that's a big part of why the crowds haven't been up to this level. But I think kind of experiencing the solar debate when you're dealing with 2,500 up to 5,000 worth of acres versus when we're talking about maybe 32, we're kind of in a different possible category. But we're encouraged by last week, encouraged to learn a bit more here. Of course, for the Board of Adjustment, we'll continue the pursuit of information transfer back and forth through the zoning commission to elevate that debate likely to specifics of how we put something in the ordinance as far as nuclear energy generation. So that will definitely be a big part of it. So just happy to have the county attorney's office involved in this process as well now through that review. So lots to learn. I think it's very encouraging. And I think that goes to say with any debate, you have to look at both risk and benefit on everything. I think Steve brought up a very good point there tonight, that if you really think about every conditional use that we've ran through here, we're kind of naturally doing that. without, saying it out loud as far as, the necessary and desirable and the criteria that we look at as far as conditional uses. That was the whole point of my question, was to kind of get us more so in the mindset that we're looking at this in theory, but ultimately when you get to the point of having some applicant bring something forward to the Board of Adjustment, and you have the citizen out there that might, give you the question that, I've heard about Chernobyl, or I've heard about this. Are we going to be equipped as far as kind of understanding the historical nature? And I appreciate everything that all of our zoning commissioners, Board of Adjustment members, and the Board of Supervisors bring to the table. And this is definitely an instance in zoning. A lot of times we don't really think about it, but history matters, situations matter across the board. And even within our zoning ordinance, when we look at criteria, sometimes we owe it to kind of looking at history, looking at the facts and figures and regulations, and understanding that you can't clearly compare everything perfectly. There's all fast track nuclear versus the full scale nuclear versus storage. We have lots of concepts, and we got to at some point be able to narrow in and look at the merits of each and every idea that are brought before us. So this whole time, I still try to keep in mind, what does the project look like? What would an actual nuclear application look like once it's went through the grinder, in terms of what has to go through the federal, what has to go through the state? And right now, as Steve mentioned, he referenced the governor. I've heard him mention several times he'd love to talk to a governor, because that is a very key aspect of sort of turning on the faucet of being able to facilitate the nuclear waste in a way that would recognize this form of technology. So there's lots of fascinating research. I think it's exciting to learn about both the benefits and even the risks, so that we can have a clearer picture of whether this fits into the community or not from that aspect. So I'm definitely hopeful that when we have subsequent public meetings and everything, that those who are interested will definitely come and be engaged in the process. Obviously, this is a conceptualization of looking at what could be. And so do we have enough infrastructure and language in the ordinance to look at it as a concept? Once we potentially solidify that it could be a concept and have something in the ordinance, then there we go with a localized criteria. But there may be other folks that are, really passionate as far as the industry. So there's a different kind of aspect between the regulation side of it and the project side of it. And so project developers and those folks that are interested in it, depending on the way that the county looks at it and frames this debate, they're going to be very interested in how it's laid out in Woodbury County. And of course, the state leaders would be interested in how it's laid out in Woodbury County. And you can kind of gradually see how important that is as far as groundwork for future projects. This isn't something that's going to be next month, but it's certainly something that could be within 20 years, or actually a lot shorter. It just depends. He talked about how technology evolves. I think that's a very good point about the cell phones and the idea that long distance doesn't cost us much anymore. I remember growing up, don't you dare dial a long distance number, I'd get in big trouble. So I had to always have my friends be local. But I guess the point is we've got a lot of innovation right in front of us as far as what's available. And I do find that number very fascinating as far as energy output over the last several years. 20 years, I think he said, but imagine all the cell phone chargers plugged into the grid, all the computers plugged into the grid, all the laptops, and all of these different energy devices. I've gotten to the point, I wonder how much energy am I wasting just by having a cord plugged in? And it's a very minimal, but if you kind of pull them all off, you realize that it all does kind of add up if you look at the level of generation. So yeah, I would say kind of I'd ask you to pay attention, stay engaged with what's going on before the zoning commission, but it certainly wouldn't hurt in spare time if you get a chance to pull up and read anything you can read about nuclear. Just, and that's what I always try to do is find some random things sometimes to learn because it definitely instills in. So that's generally the staff comments. So.
Okay, no, we appreciate that, Dan. Thanks for the update on that. Good for us all to, have that discussion tonight, and here's that information, I think, so. Okay, with that, I'll move down to item 8. Is there any board member comment or inquiry? Okay. Seeing none, I guess I will entertain, is there a motion to adjourn? Tom's made a motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Larry. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Okay, we're adjourned.
Okay, I will commence with the recording.